Hello everyone, and a very warm welcome to another lesson. In this lesson, we are going to learn about IELTS Speaking Part 1. Our topic is going to be politeness. Politeness. In this lesson, we are going to look at some questions that the examiner is likely to ask you during your IELTS Speaking Part 1. We are also going to look at some sample answers, and at the end of this lesson, I'm going to give you some tips to ensure that you pass your IELTS speaking test with a very high band. Now, let us begin the lesson. Question 1. Are you polite? Are you polite? In this question, the examiner wants to know whether you are a polite person. The opposite of polite is rude. So, in this question, the examiner wants to know, are you polite or are you rude? Now, you can answer this question by saying, yes, I would say that I'm quite polite because I do always say sorry, excuse me, and thank you, even to complete strangers. Yes, I would say that I'm quite polite because I do always say sorry, excuse me, and thank you, even to complete strangers. Now, in this answer, I have confirmed to the examiner that I am polite. I would say that I'm quite polite. And I've explained to the examiner why I would describe myself as a polite person. I pointed out that I do always say sorry, excuse me, and thank you, even to complete strangers. So, in this question, do not simply tell the examiner that, yes, I am polite, or no, I am not polite. Once you have said yes, then explain further, elaborate your answer. Yes, I would say that I'm quite polite because I do always say sorry, excuse me, and thank you, even to complete strangers. Now let's move on to question 2. Why is it important to be polite? Why is it important to be polite? In that question, the examiner simply wants you to give him or her some reasons as to why you think it is important to be polite. What are the benefits? Why should we be polite? So to answer that question, you can say, being polite is a sign of good manners as well as a good upbringing. When you show politeness, people will respond to you with respect, friendliness, and acceptance. Being polite is a sign of good manners as well as a good upbringing. When you show politeness, people will respond to you with respect, friendliness, and acceptance. So in that answer, I have given the examiner a number of reasons why it is important to be polite. First of all, I pointed out that it is a sign of good manners. Number 2, it is a sign of good upbringing. And finally, I pointed out to the examiner that when you show politeness, people will respond to you with respect. If you're polite, people will respond to you with respect, friendliness, and acceptance. So, in that answer, I have a number of points. I have a number of reasons as to why I think it is important. And I have joined them together using linking words. Okay? As well as being polite is a sign of good manners as well as So instead of saying and, you can also use as well as. Okay, being polite is a sign of good manners as well as a good upbringing. When you show politeness, people will respond to you with respect, friendliness, and acceptance. You can use as well as instead of and. Now let's move on to question 3. How do people in your country show politeness? How do people in your country show politeness? In that question, the examiner simply wants to know the people in your country, how do they show politeness? Remember, this question is not asking for your personal opinion. It's just asking you to give what you have seen. What have you observed? How do people in your country show politeness? Now, to answer this question, you can say, majority of my countrymen exhibit their politeness by greeting anyone they come across, queuing for public services, as well as saying thank you and excuse me. Others will give their seat to the elderly or pregnant women in a train or bus. Majority of my countrymen exhibit their politeness by greeting anyone they come across, queuing for public services, as well as saying thank you and excuse me. Others will give you their seat to the elderly or pregnant women in a train or bus. So in that answer, I have identified a number of ways through which people in my country show politeness. I have said that majority of my countrymen exhibit. Exhibit simply means show, exhibit. Majority of my countrymen exhibit their politeness. So some of the things that people do in my country that show that they are polite is, 1, they greet anyone they come across. When they come across anyone, they will say hello or good morning or good evening. That's one way. Number 2, they will queue for public services. Like, for example, when they go to the supermarket to check out, they will queue. They go to the hospital, they will queue. They go to the bank, they will queue. They will stand in a line, waiting to be served. And the next way through which they show that they are polite is by saying thank you and also saying excuse me. For example, if you want to pass and there are a lot of people, you can say to them excuse me so that they can create way for you to pass. If someone does something to you, then you say thank you. It is a sign of politeness. Other ways is some people will give their seat to the elderly or pregnant women in a train or a bus. For example, if you are in a very overcrowded train or bus and you see an elderly person, that is an old person or a pregnant woman, then you can say to them, excuse me, madam, would you like to sit here? Excuse me, sir, would you like to sit down, please? So offering an older person or a heavily pregnant woman a seat in an overcrowded train or bus is a sign of politeness. Now, let's move on to question 4. Has the way people show politeness changed in your country? Has the way people show politeness changed in your country? In this question, the examiner wants to know, has politeness changed in your country compared to the past? Now you can answer this question by saying, I think so. My grandparents are always complaining that young people have no manners because they never say hello to strangers, offer them a drink, or even a simple smile when they meet them. I think so. My grandparents are always complaining that young people have no manners because they never say hello to strangers, offer them a drink, or even a simple smile when they meet them. So in that answer, I have pointed out that I think, yes, I think so. I think that the way people show politeness has changed in my country. And the reason for that is because my grandparents are always complaining that young people have no manners because they never say hello to strangers, they never offer them a drink or even a simple smile when they meet them. So for those reasons, then it is very clear to my grandparents that the way people show politeness has changed, because back in the day when my grandparents were young, people had more manners. They would always say hello to strangers. They would offer them a drink and they would smile. These days, when you come across a stranger, nobody's going to say hello to you. Nobody's going to offer you a drink. Nobody's going to offer you a smile at all. Now, question 5. How can you teach children to be polite? How can you teach children to be polite? In this question, the examiner simply wants to know, how can you teach your own children or any children? How can you teach them to be polite? Now, to answer this question, you have to identify a number of ways through which you can teach children to be polite. What are some of the things you can teach them? Now, to answer this question, you can say, you can teach children to become polite by being a good role model. You can also encourage them to always be well-mannered by saying sorry, excuse me, thank you, and queuing. You can teach children to become polite by being a good role model. You can also encourage them to always be well-mannered by saying sorry, excuse me, thank you, and queuing. So in that answer, I have identified a number of ways through which you can teach your children to be polite. 1, by being a good role model. A good role model means that you yourself should be polite, because children learn by copying. So if you're polite, then your children will learn how to be polite by copying the things that you do. So by being a good role model, you are teaching your children to be polite. Number 2, you can encourage them to always be well-mannered. Well-mannered means to have good manners, and they can be well-mannered by saying sorry, by saying excuse me, by saying thank you, and by queuing. Queuing means standing in a line. Okay, there are certain situations where children need to stand in a line, and it is a sign of politeness when they stand behind the other person instead of going at the front of the queue. Some people, when they go, for example, to a supermarket and they want to pay for something, they ignore everybody else who is standing there and they go right in front of the queue. That is impolite. It is rude. It is good to stand in the line behind other people who are there before you and wait to be served. So, this brings me to the last section of our lesson, where I'm going to give you just a few tips to ensure that you pass your IELTS speaking test with a very high band. Tip number 1, ensure that you understand the question. Read the question, underline the keyword, or for part 1, listen to the examiner very carefully. Okay, the examiner will start by saying you, okay, tell me about politeness. Are you polite? Okay, so just listen to the question that the examiner is asking you. Now, tip number 2, try as much as possible to use a variety of sentence structures in your answers. Use simple, compound, and complex sentences. A simple sentence has 1 verb. A compound sentence has 2 verbs. A complex sentence has 3 verbs. If you're not familiar with those 3 types of sentences, I have actually uploaded a video on the 3 types of sentences in English, have a look at my playlist on grammar and you will find that video there. Now, the other tip that I'm going to give you is try and use the correct vocabulary for the topic that you're speaking about. In this case, we're talking about politeness, so there are some words and phrases that are very important, such as sorry, excuse me, thank you, okay, good manners, a good upbringing, okay, words like respect, friendliness, acceptance, words like queuing for public services, okay, words like giving their seat to the elderly or pregnant women, words like, for example, being a good role model, okay. All these are words that are relevant to the topic of politeness. The next tip is try and ensure that, and this is the most important of them all, that you speak in the correct grammar and in the correct tense. Now, all the words that I have underlined in blue, you can see they are either in the present tense or in the present continuous tense. I would say that, okay, being polite is a sign of good manners, okay. Majority of my countrymen exhibit. I said exhibit means show. So you ensure that you speak in the correct tense. That is extremely important. Actually, it is the most important of them all. It's what really determines your band, because no matter how good your vocabulary is, no matter how many sentence structures you use, no matter how many ideas you give the examiner, if you're speaking in incorrect tenses, you have poor subject-verb agreement, your grammar is all over the place, automatically you score a low band. So familiarize yourself with tenses, and the most important thing is just listen to the question that the examiner is asking you. In what tense is that question, and then respond to the question in the correct tense. Okay, now in this section now, I'm going to read the questions for you, and as I read the questions, please try and think of an answer. Are you ready? Okay, let us begin. Are you polite? Why is it important to be polite? How do people in your country show politeness? Has the way people show politeness changed in your country? How can you teach children to be polite? Now, I hope you had no issues answering those questions, and if you had a few problems, then do not worry, because you still have the sample answers. And I'm now going to read the sample answers once more so that you can hear how they're supposed to be pronounced. Number 1. Are you polite? Yes, I would say that I'm quite polite, because I do always say sorry, excuse me, and thank you, even to complete strangers. Why is it important to be polite? Being polite is a sign of good manners as well as a good upbringing. When you show politeness, people will respond to you with respect, friendliness, and acceptance. How do people in your country show politeness? Majority of my countrymen exhibit their politeness by greeting anyone they come across, queuing for public services, as well as saying thank you and excuse me. Others will give their seat to the elderly or pregnant women in a train or bus. Has the way people show politeness changed in your country? I think so. My grandparents are always complaining that young people have no manners because they never say hello to strangers, offer them a drink, or even a simple smile when they meet them. How can you teach children to be polite? You can teach children to become polite by being a good role model. You can also encourage them to always be well-mannered by saying sorry, excuse me, thank you, and queuing. Now, if you found this lesson helpful, if you learned anything at all from this lesson, then be polite and subscribe to the channel. Give this video a thumbs up and share this video on all your social media platforms because you are polite. Okay? Now, thank you very much and see you in our next lesson. Bye bye.